You'll notice that the Corvette's changed positions in the garage. I actually had a little bit of work to do on the Dakota, so futzed with that a little bit. But this next video, I thought I was gonna be able to show you guys boosted pulls, and I thought I was gonna have it tuned and blah blah blah. And after that first test drive, I've been driving it now for 3 weeks, off and on. What will happen is I'll drive it to work and back and find a little issue. Drive it to work and back, find a little issue. So this video is just basically all of the little silly things that keep popping up. Nothing big, motor's not blown up, no showstoppers, just fiddly things. And the whole time the tuner, I'll text the tuner, hey, when are we gonna tune? Oh, I'm a week out. Okay, I'll wait a couple days. Are we still a week out? Oh, I'm another week out. Like, okay, wait a couple days, and finally, I finally managed to get a date out of him, and we've got it nailed down. I'm going to take off from work. It's August 14th is Dyno day. It's going to get dyno tuned locally by a local legend who, no matter what tuning circles you run in, this is the guy. We actually have a local gas station here in Central Arkansas. They call it the Corvette Conoco is the nickname. It's a Conoco gas station that's got this little tiny shop bolted onto the side of it. And there's this guy who works on all models of Corvettes, does all kinds of tuning on all kinds of LS powered stuff. And he's got a dyno at his house, and that's where he does all of his tuning. So I managed to track him down, get his number, and that's who's going to be doing my finishing the tune on this. The email tuner I was working with just wasn't really, I wasn't really happy with the responsiveness and those kind of things. And plus, I always wanted to get it dynoed once I had it tuned anyway. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to get the tune and the dyno done all in one day. He said we're going to start around 9 a.m. We're going to finish around 4 or 5, which I don't even think it's going to take that long just because it's already really close with the tune that I did last time around. But this time we're going 10 PSI. I shouldn't run out of fuel pump. He told me I needed injectors, of course. I should have known when I was working with the Dakota. Every tuner has their own spark plugs and their own injectors that they want to work with. So if you're building a car, don't even think about buying plugs and injectors unless you talk to whoever's going to tune it, because that's twice now I've had to rebuy injectors and rebuy plugs. So I thought I was going to run the ZR1 plugs. He said no, don't do that. The ones I want you to put in there are like 5 heat ranges colder, blah blah blah. These are the ones I've run 10s in the quarter with, and blah blah. Okay, fine, whatever. I'll go spend the $20 and buy another set of plugs. Injectors were a little bit more expensive, but he was worried with the injectors I have in here I'm going to run out of injector. He said he would rather have headroom and injectors than not. So, okay. So I'm going to be throwing a whole bunch of stuff up on the Corvette forum to sell. A bunch of stuff I had to buy twice for this. But anyway, I'm just trying to keep content coming y'all's way. I want to put a video up every week, and so you guys can see the progress. So this is just little fiddly things. The next video after this will be tuning it, my tuning, like I set the RPM, tuned the boost, set up a few different things on it. So I'm going to do a video of all the things I learned about my boost controller, about my HP tuners. Then the next video after that will be dyno day. So this video this week, fiddly stuff. Next week, tuning. Well, not tuning necessarily, but setting up for the tune. Then the next video after that, dyno pulls for sure. Found the vacuum leak. The gasket isn't in the intake manifold, and it's behind the butterfly valve, so it's definitely the problem. I've checked all of the cathedral ports on the intake. Those are not leaking. But another reason I'm super glad that I had this vacuum leak is because it helped me uncover this situation going on right here, where the thing is leaking. I either didn't tighten it enough or something's going on. And it's actually getting oil down inside there, so a couple things I gotta fix. When you work on cars enough, no matter how much you check and recheck, sometimes you just make a mistake. So apparently that gasket got ripped, and I thought, oh my gosh, where's the rest of the gasket? Well, I got really lucky. It is, where's it at? I can't see it, but I'm really hoping it didn't suck down in the engine. Let's hope. Oh, okay, good. That's all of it. Woo! Talk about dodging a bullet. Yep. That's all of it. Oh my goodness. Ooh, that could have been horrific. Well, at least I found the vacuum leak, and it wasn't an expensive fix. So, and I haven't really been hitting a lot of boost because I'm still waiting for the tune. I've got the appointment here in a little over a week. Still waiting for the final date, but the guy said he was a week out, so at least it gives me time to fiddle with and fix all this stuff. So I took this guy out of the car to see exactly what was going on, and I thought, well, maybe I boogered up one of these copper washers again, and they were fine. But whenever I took this guy apart and started looking at him, I'll just leave that on there. Look at what's going on here. Oh, come on. So you see how that's kind of sheared off? It's actually got stress marks on there. So what looks like happened is I tightened this down just enough to where it stressed these little walls out, and it relaxed enough to where it started leaking. So these little black things right here, you can get them from Airflow, and it's been a great thing. It solved a great problem, but I kind of have two issues. The height here, now with those taller motor mounts, is too much to where the sensor out here on the top is actually hitting the fiberglass wall. The other issue is that's a little bit weak for my taste. So what I decided to do is go to a hydraulics store and see what sort of fittings they have. So this is what I came up with. It's actually the same exact size as this, as far as that is concerned. Oh, so it screws into the block like that, and then I get my 90 for the oil supply. But now I don't have a place to put the oil filter sensor, or the oil pressure sensor. So this guy right here on the LS2 Corvettes, it might be the same on some of the other Corvettes or some of the other LS motors, but this particular one, this is an M16 by 1.5, and that is pretty big. And unless I want to spend another $50 on that and wait another 3 or 4 weeks to get that thing, it's going to be a while. Well, coincidentally, my oil pressure gauge has almost the same exact oil pressure sensor. It's a 0 to 100 psi sensor, but that is an 1/8". So what I'm going to try to do is actually drill and tap a hole and put it right there. Now that might seem stupid, but this thing, all of these fittings are high carbon steel, and the wall thickness of this fitting is actually 10 millimeters. So I've measured it with a set of high accuracy calipers from work, I took this in and measured it with some of our fancy equipment. So I've measured the wall thickness here, and this is actually 10 millimeters thick. Well, that's almost the entire thickness of this right here. Plus, this is an NPT thread, which means it's tapered as it gets to the top. So what seals this is the taper of the threads. So I've got a 1/8 inch NPT tap. So I'm going to put a hole in the side right here and thread that guy in, and I've already double checked that's the same exact connector. So that's my plan to solve the oil leak. I've already got the gasket back in the throttle body, so that solves my vacuum leak. But here is here's a tricky situation. So the issue is that this fuel pressure regulator is actually garbage. It's actually bad. I guess that's the risk you run whenever you buy things from eBay. So I've actually bought another one. And the reason I did is because they're actually really good. So let me prove to you that these $30 fuel pressure regulators are actually worth the $30 that you spend on them from eBay. Alright, so here's my Dakota. There's the rebuilt supercharged engine. And that is one of those $30 fuel pressure regulators from eBay with the fittings. And that has been running in there for over a year. And what happens when you run it, it holds fuel pressure just fine, but then slowly over time it drops fuel pressure till it gets down to almost zero. But there's still a little bit of pressure in the line because it fires right up. Problem with this guy over here is that the second you turn it off, the fuel pressure drops to nothing, but it doesn't keep any fluid in the lines. It actually completely drains off or siphons it off, and I don't know if it's because of the block-off plates you put in the in-tank fuel pressure regulator, because the one in the passenger side actually has holes in it, and I don't know if it's because it's bleeding off pressure there or what. But I do know that whenever I took it apart, because these things, when you get anything machined from Chinese suppliers, you have to take them apart and just verify. And the reason is because you get little things like this little tiny burr right here. And you've got to just inspect them. Well, whenever I took that one apart, this thing right here was completely flat and it had a little burr on the top. And I don't know if you can see that, but it actually has a tiny little chamfer in there. Well, the one that I got previously did not have that chamfer in there, and it had a little burr. So what happens is that ball does not seal against that center section. So it doesn't seal properly, so whenever you turn the car off, this actually just continues to bleed pressure. Well, the one that's in my truck over there actually has a good chamfer on it, and it works just fine. So I ordered another one, and it came in, and I've taken it apart, and this one looks golden. It just has some dirt and burrs that I've got to clean up. So there's like some leftover metal shavings on there. I've got to validate that none of that's inside there, but so I've got to check, or I've got to change out the fuel pressure regulator. I've got to do this thing real quick, and then I can put everything back together, and it should be fine. So far, I've got around 100 miles on it. So I took it for a test drive that night. I drove it to the gym the next day. Everything was fine. So then the next day, I drove it to work and had it aligned. And I'll post all of that, the alignment. I'm here at Superior Chevrolet in Conway, where I live. This is the guy, what's your name?
Tim Elton.
Tim Elton. Okay, so he's the guy that's going to be doing the alignment on my car right now. You want to walk us through what's going on up here on the screen and how bad it's off?
Well, if you look, you can see both tires are facing in.
Yeah.
Both these tires are facing out and cambered in. If you'll go to bar graph, it'll show you a little bit better.
Okay, wow. So the left side's terrible, the right side's okay.
Yeah, and then we'll go, if you'll, there we go. Okay.
Yeah, it's standing in the way, sorry.
Go to the next axle. This is the rear.
Yeah.
it's out pretty bad on both.
Yeah, so that was me marking the cams and trying to get it as close as I could. It's still pretty far off, and you can tell when you drive it. It's real kind of squirrely. Like if you go around the corner, you can kind of feel it just not act right, and the steering wheel is a little bit crooked. So this is what happens when you take all kind of stuff apart and then put it all back together.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, so you got your work cut out for you.
Yeah. And you're wanting positive camber?
Well, not necessarily positive camber, but
negative.
Well, on the rear, if you can just get it right, like right here up on the top end of the spec, I'm okay with that. Because right now it sort of wears the inside of the back tires a little bit more.
Cambered in from the factory.
So maybe like on the top end of the spec, and I'm cool with that.
Okay.
So thanks for answering my question.
But during the alignment, I noticed that there was a vacuum leak, and that's where I'm at right now. So it's just little fiddly things. So I still haven't heard from the tuner on my exact date, but I haven't been pushing him really hard because all this stuff started happening. The oil pressure leak, the vacuum leak, and the stupid fuel pressure regulator. So the pressure regulator actually works when you're driving down the road, but the second you turn it off, it just drains everything. It's really getting annoying because when you start the car, it turns and 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 turns, and then it fires up. So I'm hoping that this is going to fix it. Either way, it'll seal it a lot better, but we'll just have to see what happens.
It's kind of annoying, but I don't have much of a choice. So whenever I was trying to thread this in here, because of the size of these fittings, it's hitting the fiberglass firewall, whatever you call it, cowling thing, so I had to take the valley pan off just to get to it. If you want to know what the valley pan gasket of an LS2 in a Corvette looks like, that's it. If you want to know what the PCV system of a Corvette looks like, that's it. So it's got that little pinhole right there. And the only thing I ever get is like this oily, watery stuff. That's the only thing that I ever get out of my PCV valve. These are the tower gaskets. There's the valley of my motor. Not much to it. It's completely empty. So I had to take the valley pan off just to get this thing threaded down in there. And I want to point something out. Even though this was a hydraulic fitting, the hydraulic oil was rated at 110 degrees. So it had a neoprene gasket right there. I swapped it out with a Viton gasket because Viton has a much higher temperature rating. And the oil operating temperature for my car is 120 degrees. So, and these things, you can clock them anywhere you need them. And then you tighten down this bolt, and that's what actually, or nut, and that's what actually seals it. So it's going to look like this when it's in the car. And then this guy is going to get screwed to that. And it's going to be, and I can clock this thing in any angle that I need to, and then tighten that down. And then this is the oil supply for the turbos. So I'm not videoing every step of the way, but this is what I ended up with. The sensor has just a little bit of clearance underneath there, and then that has a little bit of clearance. And that definitely ain't breaking anytime soon. I can wrench down on that as much as I want. Those hydraulic fittings are rated for 3,000 psi of hot hydraulic fluid. It'll be fine for the 40 psi that my oil sensor has to deal with. So I only thought that I could use the oil sensor from the fuel gauge that I had. So this is what the gauge does when there's nothing plugged in. If I plug in the sorry, hold on just a second. I'm trying to get this guy in here. But if I plug in the fuel gauge or the sensor that comes with the kit, I get 0. And I get a red, it's reading the sensor, okay? I'm gonna put it down. When I plug in the sensor from the Corvette, that's what I read, 20 psi. So they're mapped differently. So what I looked and looked all over the place for an adapter from a 1/8 NPT. I looked for an M16 by 1.5 adapter. I looked all over the place. I couldn't find anything that wasn't like super special at some weird eBay site or something like that. So what I decided to do I went looking for like, okay, maybe there's a GM sensor out there somewhere that's 8 NPT, because 8 NPT was about as big as I felt comfortable screwing into my fitting here, because that's how big the wall of it was. So looked and looked and looked. I couldn't find a GM sensor or any kind of a sensor with that connector in a 1/8 NPT size. So I was Googling and Googling, and one guy said, why don't you just turn down the factory sensor? Like, duh, that makes perfect sense. So what I did was I threw the sensor in my drill in the vise. Well, so what I did is I put my drill in the vise, put a socket on it. I put the sensor in the socket and rested my chisel up against the side of it and turned it down to the size I needed to actually tap it to a 1/8 NPT. So that's what I did. This is actually tapped down to a 1/8 NPT, and you can see there's some machine marks and stuff like that, but it turned out pretty good. I actually drilled a hole and tapped the hole to 1/8 NPT just to make sure that the threads were cut properly, and it seems like it works. So I'm gonna just screw this sensor, the factory GM sensor after my modification, into that hole where I had planned to put this guy, and go from there. There's the oil sending unit, the factory one that I turned down. No leaks. One more fiddly thing on the list. I'm putting a colder thermostat in it. This is the part number. So that's a 160-degree thermostat. My reason for that is that I've been driving it back and forth to work, which is my workplace moved a little bit further away, so I actually have to drive a little bit further than 2 minutes now. And it's July here, and it's about 100 degrees on the normal basis, high humidity, and the car's just running a little bit hotter than I want it to. It kind of stays at 198, 200 degrees F during cruising, and whenever I sit at a stoplight and idle, it'll go up to 205. The oil is getting up to 220, 225, and a hot engine is just not a good idea in a forced induction application. It's already going to add heat to the engine when you hit boost. So did a little bit of Googling. Apparently there's a LS motor out there for, I think it's a Trailblazer or something like that. And it has a 160-degree thermostat. So I went and picked it up, 13 bucks at the local hardware store. There's one from Mr. Gasket, and then O'Reilly sells this one from Murray, which a thermostat's a thermostat. There's just 2 bolts right down there on the thermostat housing, and it just slips in there. So getting ready. The tuner says sometime next week, so I'm trying to get everything squared away while I'm waiting for the tuner to give me a date. Having an engine running cool while it's on the dyno doing back-to-back pulls will definitely help. You know, 10 or 15 degrees cooler will definitely make a difference. So new thermostat, cruising at 180, oil pressure at 35 psi. AFRs are still good. Fuel pressure is great. So nothing out of the ordinary there. I will point out that as the oil temps increased, the oil pressure would drop, and it would get down to the point where cruising on the interstate, the oil pressure would drop down to 30 psi. So everything's running cooler and better with that thermostat in there, so super happy about that.